Hey there, it's Kat and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I want to talk about the sci-fi classic Dune. So we'll talk a little bit about the book by Frank Herbert and then the 2021 film, which I was lucky enough to see last night. We'll talk about the things that I liked, the things that I didn't like, and how good of an adaptation I think the 2021 film is. So let's start this review off by saying that I am not a long-term fan of Dune. In fact, I only read it yesterday. The whole thing in one day before I watched the movie. So I'm very much a Dune newbie, and my only encounter with this book happened on the same day that I went to see the film. So let's talk about my feelings on the book first. Dune is a sci-fi classic that was published in 1965. It's set in a world which is largely dependent on a rare substance called spice, and that spice can only be found on the planet Arrakis. So in Dune, we follow the handover of the stewardship from the House Harkonnen to the House of Atreides. The book has a number of perspective characters that it follows, so you have Paul, who is the heir to House Atreides, you have Jessica, who is the concubine to the Duke of Atreides, and there are a bunch of other people that are also important, but I would say that those two are the main characters. Now, I went into this book thinking, oh, it's a classic that everyone says is great, but I don't know if I'm gonna like it because I think it's gonna read old. Now, I don't know if I can explain exactly what I mean by that, but there is a style of writing, I'm thinking particularly of The Magician by Raymond E. Feist, that just sounds old, like it's trying to emulate Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings. And I thought that this writing might be similar, and that's partly why I avoided it for so long. The other reason I avoided it for so long was that everyone says it's really good, and I didn't want to not like it. Well, it turns out I did really like it, and I actually rated it 4 out of 5 stars. There were a couple of reasons that I didn't rate it 5 out of 5 stars, and the chief among those is that I didn't feel particularly connected with a lot of the characters. Like, I didn't really care what happened to them. They're not exactly the most personable bunch, and a lot of them aren't very nice people. And I think that lack of connection there for me just dragged it down a little bit. But I'm sure a lot of people don't have that problem, and that is a personal preference. Now, before we talk about the 2021 film, I do just want to briefly mention that there was a film in 1984 that came out, and I haven't watched that because I didn't want my first impression of Dune to be Sting. Although I am considering checking it out now because I have heard that it's crazy, and I'm kind of intrigued. So the 2021 film is Dune Part 1. And I think it is quite important that you go into it knowing that it is part 1 of the whole story. The book version of Dune is separated into 3 different books, and the film version covers books 1 and 2. So book 3 is about the last third of the book that we have left for part 2. Now, it is really good that the film covers so much of the book because it is 2.5 hours long, and it might start feeling like it's dragging a little bit if it didn't have so much content in it. As it is, I really don't have a problem with the length of the film because I think it melds really well with the atmosphere that's being created, and the atmosphere in this film is so perfect. The scenic landscapes that are in this film are just stunning. The film as a whole actually is just beautiful, and I think another thing that goes into creating this really cool atmosphere is the music, and there is some really interesting music styles in it, and you really get a feel for the different cultures that are being melded into this one film. So there's some throat singing and there's bagpipes. I mean, you don't go into a sci-fi film expecting to hear bagpipes, but it was really cool and I really appreciated it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the differences and the similarities between the book and the film. Let's start off talking about the characters, and I will try not to spoil anything. There will be certain moments that I do want to discuss, but I will let you know before I spoil anything. Okay? Okay. So overall, I actually can't decide whether I prefer the characters from the book or the film, because I think with the book you had a lot more time to get to know certain characters, and I think a lot of the characters have a lot more time to let you into their mind and sort of see what they're feeling and sort of empathize with them a little bit. Whereas in the film, there is so much going on that you kind of have that cut down. So I think one of the characters that suffers the most is Jessica, and she a little bit comes across as a crying lady in the film, for a little bit. And I think perhaps if you hadn't read the book, then you might not know the reasoning behind why she's so upset at times. But I also think quite a lot of her character got left out. There isn't really very much explanation about the Bene Gesserit, and I wish there was a little bit more about that, but you really can't fit everything into a film, so I do understand, and I think they did a good enough job of putting it in there. I just hope it gets expanded more in part 2. Paul is definitely more personable in the film than he is in the book. I think in the book he can come across as really unfriendly and rude, and I don't particularly like him by the end of the book, but that is a factor of something that has happened to his character that I wasn't super on board with. I do like Paul in the film, and I feel like he edged the character out of being rude. Now, a character that I preferred in the book was actually Leto, and I think that's simply because his character got a lot more time to develop in the book, and you sort of saw more of his relationship with Jessica. You get a few scenes where you see them together, but I don't really think that their love is really explained, and it made me kind of sad because I thought they had some cute moments in the book. Also, I don't think that he and quite a few of the members of the House of Atreides got a chance to shine with their goodness. There are like little sections where you get to see that these are good people, but I just don't think it quite comes across as strongly as it does in the book. Again, that could be because of time constraints though. There are a lot of other characters that I really like, but they do come across a little bit surface level because you just don't have time to get to know them the way that you do in the book. A character that I did prefer in the film was actually Gurney. I don't know why, I just didn't really connect with him so much in the book, which is a little bit strange because usually I like that kind of grumpy man character, but I just didn't really connect with him, and then when I watched the film, I don't know, there's something about him that just like hit that endearing side of the character, and I was totally there for Gurney. I haven't really talked about House Harkonnen, but they were creepy. Their design was really, really creepy. I don't know what it is. Shave people's eyebrows off and make them as pale as me, and you get a really creepy person. But the Baron especially, I didn't find him particularly creepy in the book, and then when you see his design and the way that he acts and moves in the film, yeah, the creepiness is there, and he really feels like a threatening character, so that is great. Now just one last comment on them. Dave Bautista as Rabban. I don't know if it's just me, but all I heard the entire time was Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, and I don't usually have this problem with Dave Bautista. Maybe it's the bold alien makeup sort of thing. I don't know what it is, but I just heard Drax, and it kind of took me out of it a little bit. Everybody else, I was really immersed in their acting and their portrayal of the characters, but every time Rabban said something, I was like, Drax, what are you doing, Drax? And I found that really frustrating. I don't know if that's just me, but that was a slight problem. I feel like everyone else was really well cast, and I really enjoyed their performances. So let's go back to the atmosphere that I was talking about before. I think that there is a really great contrast between the two planets that you get to see in this film. You get the Atreides homeworld, which is a planet that has so much rain and water all over it, and it's so beautiful and green, and has so many lakes and water all around it. It's really pretty, and you get this sense of coldness and freshness and life. And then when we transition to Arrakis, everything is orange and hot, and you can just almost feel how hot it is. I thought that was a really good juxtaposition, and I really appreciated the focus on all of the water and the wetness before we moved into the desert planet. Another thing to note that I think the film misses a little bit is the human aspect of life on Arrakis. So you get a little bit of interaction with the Fremen and how they live, but you don't really see it in detail. And you don't really get to meet any of the characters or citizens that live in the compound with the Atreides. So it's kind of removed from the population, whereas in the book you get given little sections about giving people water. And you get a lot more references as to how much water means to people and why it means so much to them. And I think it just helps to build this character that I think is a little bit missing from the film. But again, this is a really large book that's been condensed into the film, and some things have to go, I guess. I also wish there'd been more talk about Spice, because I kind of just feel like it was used as motivation for the Harkonnens to come back. I don't know, I think it was just explained far better in the book, and I would have liked a little bit more explanation in the film. Because if I hadn't read the book, then I might just think that Spice was all about profit. Which it is largely about profit, but there's so much more about it than that. I think there is a lot to do with people's lifespans and extending their lifespans and their great intellect. It does improve people's thinking capabilities and all that sort of thing, and I think a lot of that was missing in the film. So another major feature of the story of Dune is the politics. I think in the film there is quite a lot of politics that is mentioned, but there is nowhere near as much as there is in the book. In the book, everybody's mind seems to be on politics at all times. People are focused on assassination attempts, they're focused on figuring out why pieces on chessboards might be moved in certain ways, and why decisions about the Empire might be being made. It's all very interesting, and I feel like everybody is really clever, and they're all thinking about it. And I feel like everybody is trying to be 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Now in the film I don't think you really get this, and I think the House of Atreides really suffers. Particularly Leto, they kind of seem a little bit less intelligent than they are. Which is a shame really, because I think them trying to outmaneuver different great houses and other powers is very interesting. I said earlier that the Bene Gesserit weren't really involved with the film. They were involved slightly. I just don't think you really get like the grand perspective of how many fingers they have in all of the pies and quite why. And I think that's partly because the breeding aspect of Dune is sort of by the wayside. That's missing in terms of Jessica's storyline. You don't really get to hear her background, and I think that's a bit of a shame really. Perhaps that'll happen in part 2. And you also don't get to know why Paul's parents aren't married. That's a side note, but I think it's really important because the film makes out as if they just haven't got married yet, rather than they haven't got married for political reasons, which makes more sense and sort of makes them seem more savvy in this political landscape. Now I think because of the lack of focus on the Atreides being involved in sort of understanding this politics, or at least as far as we can see in the film, I think there is something that falls flat. And I think you could probably consider this a minor spoiler. I mean, it's mentioned from very early on in the book, but it's sort of meant to be a surprise in the film. So if you don't want to know this minor spoiler, wait until I put the book down. I will hold this book up for the duration of me talking about spoilers. Okay? Okay. So I think the fact that the Atreides aren't really talking about plots, assassination attempts, their understanding of the politics and the game that they're playing, it makes the betrayal section fall really short because you don't really get the sense that they could ever have seen it coming. Whereas in the book there's a constant discussion of who is the person who is working with the enemy, who's going to betray me, someone will, but who's it going to be? And then when it finally happens, it hits really hard because you're like, oh, okay, you have some connection to that character, you sort of understand. And in the film I really feel like that falls flat because the character who does it, I'm not going for major spoilers here, so I'm not going to say who, they're not super involved in the storyline, and I don't think they have a personality at all in the film. So I really feel like that whole section falls flat, which is a shame because it is a really powerful narrative tool, and if it's done right, it can be done really well. It's just unfortunate I don't think it really worked in this sense. It works much better in the book. Okay, so no more spoilers. Let's talk about some things that I really liked. Now in the film there is an added section, and I don't usually approve of added sections because I don't usually think that they add very much, especially if you're trying to condense such a big book into such a small space of time. But I do think that this very small section was worth it. There is a small scene on the Sardaukar home planet, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it added to the atmosphere and the coldness of the Emperor's warriors, and I feel like it was a really good addition. Human sacrifices and everything. We love it, I guess. Another thing I really liked was that the Baron had a weird pet that was like a spider with human hands, and it was really creepy, and I don't know why I really liked it, but it was really memorable. Yes. I also really liked the design of the ships, particularly the dragonfly ships. I just thought it was a really cool method of transport. I really liked all of the technology and the general look of the settings, so like the buildings that were created. I haven't mentioned the sandworms yet, but they were really cool. I really liked the sort of anticipation before you see the first sandworm, how there is just a dust cloud coming slowly closer, and that first shot of the teeth, when you see it in the film, it's like, oh, that is a terrifying void. It's very creepy and I like it a lot. So just to round off, I did really enjoy the film, I really enjoyed the book. I think the film is actually quite a good adaptation, and there are scenes that are taken directly from the book with dialogue that is taken directly from the book, and I remembered that very clearly from having read it earlier in the day. It's a very stylized film that is heavy on the atmosphere, and I do think quite a lot of time gets devoted to creating that atmosphere, and that's sometimes to its detriment, just in terms of we're trying to fit about 400 pages of a 700-page book into a 2.5-hour movie. Not everything goes in, but the things that they did manage to get in there was great. I don't think they really cut out too much that would really affect how you view the film. I think the only thing that I really wish had been done better was the thing I talked about in the spoiler section. So overall, I would really recommend going to see Dune. I had a lot of fun watching it. I'm really glad that I got to go and see it. And I think if you haven't read the book and you are considering it, then I would definitely pick it up. I don't think you need to have read the book before you go to see the film. I think that the two combined only enhances the experience though. So I would recommend both, but that's really up to you guys. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!